My husband demanded a divorce and the house. You can't afford a lawyer to fight me. I replied, You're right. He served me papers in court, only to see the city's most feared, expensive divorce attorney sit down next to me. He looked at him and said, She doesn't have to afford me. I'm her older brother. My name is Elena Whitmore. I'm 34 years old, and until recently, I thought I understood exactly what kind of life I had built. I had a stable job, a home I had helped turn into something warm, and a marriage that looked ordinary from the outside. My husband, Nathan, and I had been together for 5 years, married for 3. We were not dramatic, we did not fight in public, we did not give people stories to tell about us. We were quiet, routine, predictable. For a long time, I mistook that for safety. Now I know quiet and safe are not the same thing. The day everything changed did not begin with a fight. We were sitting at the dining table talking about bills, a repair quote, and whether someone needed to be home for a delivery on Friday. His coffee had gone lukewarm. My phone was face down beside my hand. Outside, the street was still and dull in the way ordinary evenings usually are. Nathan looked calm, too calm. If he had been angry, I might have braced myself. If he had been nervous, I might have sensed something was coming. But he looked like a man arriving at the end of a decision he had already made. Then he said, I want a divorce. For a second, the room felt far away. I heard him clearly. I understood him immediately. But my reaction came a beat later, as though my body needed time to catch up. I did not ask him to repeat it. I did not say, Where is this coming from? I did not accuse him of trying to hurt me. Because the way he said it made one thing obvious. This was not impulsive. This was not a threat spoken in anger. It was a conclusion. He had already decided. I was simply being informed. So I said, Okay. That caught him off guard. Only for a second, but I saw it. I had been married to him long enough to notice the smallest shift in his face. He had expected something else. Questions, tears, anger, maybe pleading. Instead, I gave him one word and a steady voice. Then he said the part that mattered even more. And I'm keeping the house. That was when I really looked at him. Not as my husband, not as the man I had built routines around, just as the person sitting across from me, calmly announcing the future he had already written in his own head. I folded my hands on the table. Because? He leaned back, more comfortable now. Because I can, he said. And because you won't be able to fight me. I said nothing. He mistook that silence for surrender and kept going. You can't afford a lawyer, he said. Not one that could actually challenge mine. And even if you tried, it would only drag this out. There it was. Not sadness, not regret, not even guilt dressed up as practicality. Certainty. He was not asking for a divorce. He was presenting terms. I nodded once. You're right. His brow tightened. What? You're right, I repeated. I can't afford a lawyer like yours. He studied me for a moment. Then I watched the tension leave his face. Relief. Confidence. He thought I was giving in. He thought the outcome had just locked into place exactly the way he wanted. Exactly, he said. So let's not make this ugly. It'll be easier for both of us. Easier. That word stayed with me. Because easier for him meant controlled by him, fast for him, clean for him. Over the next few days, everything moved too quickly. Documents appeared, conversations got shorter, the house stopped feeling like one home and started feeling like shared territory, waiting to be divided. Nathan began taking calls in other rooms, not openly hiding them, just making sure I never heard enough. One evening, I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a glass, when I heard part of one call from the hallway. Yes, he said. She agreed. A pause. No, she won't fight it. Another pause, then a quiet laugh. Yeah, it should be simple. I stood there with cold water running over my fingers and looked at my reflection in the dark window above the sink. That was the thing people kept getting wrong about calm. Calm is not the same as powerless. A few days later, he laid the papers in front of me at the dining table as if he were setting down mail. You should sign, he said. His voice was neutral, businesslike. Detached in that especially cruel way people become when they want efficiency to excuse what they're doing. I looked at the papers but did not touch them. When is the hearing? I asked. He blinked, a small reaction, but real. Next week, he said. All right. He stared at me. You're coming? Yes. His eyes narrowed slightly. Why? Because it was my marriage, too. Because I had lived in that house, too. Because I was not going to disappear from my own life just because he had already imagined me gone. But all I said was, because I should be there. He said nothing after that. He only watched me with the first hint of uncertainty. By the second day, he had begun speaking about the house as if it were already his. Not directly. That would have been more honest. Instead, he spoke in assumptions. I'll probably repaint the office. The guest room will need new furniture eventually. I may finally get rid of some of this extra kitchen stuff. I was standing right there when he said that last part. He opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and said it like he was talking to himself. But he wasn't. He wanted me to hear the shape of the future as he imagined it. A house reorganized around his preferences, stripped of my presence until every trace of me looked temporary. I said nothing. That seemed to bother him more than anger would have. He kept glancing at me in those moments, waiting for a reaction that never came. He wanted resistance he could dismiss, emotion he could use against me. Instead, I gave him stillness. That night, I lay awake listening to the house, the refrigerator cycling on and off in the kitchen, a car moving slowly outside. Then Nathan's footsteps in the hallway, the soft click of the study door, a low voice. I couldn't hear every word, but I heard enough. Yes, he said quietly. She's not contesting anything yet. A pause. No, I know. Then, sharper now. She can't outspend me. I stared at the ceiling in the dark. That hurt more than the divorce itself in those first days. Not that he wanted to leave, that he had already moved past the marriage and started planning around me as if I were a problem to manage. The next morning, he was perfectly polite. That almost made it worse. He asked if I was done with the bathroom before he showered. He moved my laptop charger aside when he needed counter space. He texted to say he would be late and added a period at the end, like we were coworkers. There is something surreal about being discarded by someone who still remembers what kind of milk you like. By Tuesday afternoon, an envelope had been delivered. Thick, official. Heavy in that way legal paperwork always is, as though weight itself is meant to intimidate you. I carried it into the kitchen and left it on the table without opening it immediately. Nathan came home an hour later, loosened his tie in the hallway, and saw it. You got it, he said. I did. You should read everything carefully. The tone was almost generous, which made it worse. I opened the packet and read every page while he stood across from me, pretending not to watch too closely. It was all there. Formal language, division terms, property claims, suggested timelines, arguments framed so neatly they made something ugly sound administrative. The house was positioned as if his claim were nearly inevitable. My role in it had been flattened into wording that did not come close to reflecting the years I had lived there. When I finished, I stacked the pages neatly. So, Nathan asked. So what? Are you going to sign? Not today. His jaw shifted. Dragging this out won't help you. I almost smiled at that. Help me. As though he were worried about my stress rather than protecting his advantage. I didn't say I was dragging anything out, I said. Then what are you doing? Reading. That answer irritated him. I could see it immediately. He had prepared for two versions of me, emotional or compliant. Calm attention to detail had not been part of his plan. He pulled out a chair and sat across from me, the same place where he had first announced the divorce. Elena, he said, lowering his voice, this doesn't have to become a spectacle. I looked at him for a long moment. Later that night, I opened my laptop at the far end of the couch and started going through old files. Mortgage records, payment confirmations, insurance documents, tax forms, emails, boring things, the paper trail of a life. I wasn't sure yet what would matter, but I needed to see everything clearly for myself. At one point, Nathan came into the living room and stopped when he saw the papers spread across the coffee table. What is this? He asked. Organizing. For what? For Thursday. The silence after that was thin and sharp. You said I was right, he said. I looked up at him. About what? That you can't afford to fight this. I said you were right that I can't afford a lawyer like yours. His expression changed, only slightly, but enough. Because now he understood that I had answered him carefully the first time, more carefully than he had realized. What does that mean? He asked. It means exactly what I said. He stood there another second, trying to figure out whether I was bluffing, stalling, or becoming a problem. Then he walked away. That night, for the first time, I heard him pacing upstairs. Not long, just enough. By Wednesday morning, he was more watchful, still controlled, still polished, but he checked his phone constantly. He asked what time I planned to leave for court, mentioned traffic, mentioned parking, asked if I needed directions, which was absurd because we had both been there before. The more neutral I was, the harder he looked at me. That afternoon, while I was folding towels in the laundry room, he appeared in the doorway. If you don't want to make this harder on yourself, he said, there's still time to handle it quietly. I folded another towel before answering. Quietly for who? His mouth tightened. For both of us. I placed the towel on the pile and said, I'll see you tomorrow. That was the moment I knew he felt it. Not the full truth. Not yet. But enough to understand that something no longer fit the story he had told himself. The courthouse always feels colder than it should. Not because of the air, because of what people carry into it. By the time I arrived the next morning, I felt strangely steady. Not calm in the way Nathan had mistaken calm for surrender, but steady in the way a person becomes when fear has already done its worst and left nothing behind except focus. I had chosen my clothes carefully. Something simple, structured, and neutral. Nothing soft enough to suggest fragility, nothing sharp enough to look performative. My hair was pulled back, minimal makeup, no jewelry except the thin bracelet I always wore. Control in small things still counts as control. Nathan was already there. Of course he was. He stood near the far side of the waiting area with his attorney, a man in his 50s with a precise haircut, a dark tailored suit, and the posture of someone used to speaking with authority before anyone formally gave him the floor. They looked aligned, comfortable, like two people walking into a meeting they expected to end in their favor. Nathan saw me almost immediately. His gaze moved over me quickly, assessing, confirming what he expected to see. Alone. He gave a small nod, polite and distant, then turned back to his attorney as if my presence required no revision to the plan. I walked to the opposite side of the room and sat down without hurrying. People moved in and out around us, low voices, soft footsteps, the rustle of papers, clerks calling names that didn't belong to us. Time stretched in that strange courthouse way, where everything matters and nothing moves quickly. At one point, Nathan's attorney glanced over at me. It was brief, but it was enough. That same quiet evaluation. No lawyer beside me, no visible support, no sign that anything about this case would be more difficult than expected. Simple. That was still the word they believed in. My phone buzzed once in my bag. I didn't need to look. A few minutes later, the door to the inner hallway opened again. Another attorney stepped inside. He didn't rush or scan the room anxiously. He walked in with the easy focus of someone who had spent years in places like this and had no interest in performing confidence because he no longer needed to. He paused just inside the doorway, took in the room once, then looked directly at me. I stood. Nathan noticed that immediately. His attention followed me as I crossed the room. For the first time that morning, his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough to show that something had moved outside expectation. I wasn't walking toward the clerk. I wasn't walking toward the exit. I was walking toward the man who had just entered. We met halfway. Morning, he said quietly. Morning, I replied. No dramatics, no unnecessary explanation, just recognition. Then we turned together and sat near the courtroom door, side by side. Nathan was staring now, openly. His attorney had stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. He watched us with narrowed eyes, already recalculating something he had not expected to need to recalculate. Nathan approached first, slowly, carefully. Who is this? He asked. Not aggressive. Not yet, but no longer certain. I looked up at him. My attorney. The word landed between us with the weight it deserved. Attorney. Not friend, not support, not someone giving me informal advice in the hallway. Representation. Nathan's jaw tightened. Since when? Since I needed one. His attorney stepped forward and extended a hand. Good morning. I'm representing Nathan. The man beside me stood and shook it once. Firm, controlled, brief. I'm aware, he said. Nathan looked between us. This wasn't mentioned. No, I said, it wasn't. Why not? I held his gaze. You didn't ask. That landed harder than it had in the living room, because now it mattered in public. He hadn't asked what I was doing, hadn't asked who I might call, hadn't asked what resources I had, what records I had reviewed, or what options I had considered. He had simply built a plan around what he assumed I could not do. The clerk stepped into the doorway and called our case. Everything shifted at once. Nathan's attorney adjusted his jacket and reset his expression. Nathan stayed still for half a second too long, as if part of him were still trying to return to the version of this morning where I had arrived alone and stayed that way. Then we all went inside. The courtroom was smaller than people imagine. No grand spectacle. Just a raised bench, a few rows of seats, clean lines, official language, and that quiet pressure that forces emotion to disguise itself as process. Nathan and his attorney took one side. My attorney and I took the other. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then the hearing began. Nathan's attorney spoke first. Clear, organized, confident. He laid out the case as though it were straightforward. Property division, financial structure, reasonable expectations, an arrangement that should move efficiently if both parties remained practical. Nathan sat beside him with his shoulders squared again, slowly rebuilding the confidence that had slipped in the hallway. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The man beside me waited until it was his turn. Then he stood. No rush, no theatrics, just presence. Your Honor, he said, voice calm and precise. Before we proceed further, I'd like to clarify representation and a few assumptions underlying the property claim. Nathan shifted beside his attorney. Small movement, but real. His attorney responded smoothly, saying the facts remain the same regardless of counsel's identity. My attorney let that sentence sit for a moment. Then he said, "Do they?" It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. He opened his folder and began laying things out piece by piece. Financial contributions, dates, transfers, records. Not an avalanche, not a performance. Just details placed in order, each one tightening the room another degree. The house had never just been a house. It was the center of Nathan's confidence because it symbolized ownership, control, and finality. He had talked about keeping it as though the matter were already settled. Now that certainty had to stand next to documents. Actual numbers, actual timelines, actual proof. My attorney asked simple questions and answered them with records. Who contributed to the down payment? Who paid what over time? Which accounts had been used? What had been omitted from the neat version Nathan was trying to present? Nathan's attorney pushed back where he could, reframed, clarified, narrowed. He was good at what he did. But defending a position is different from defending a position built on incomplete assumptions. And that difference was beginning to show. I kept my hands folded in front of me and stayed quiet. This wasn't about me speaking. It was about Nathan realizing. That was the real turning point. Not the hearing itself, but the moment he understood that the simple path he had counted on no longer existed. The judge asked a few direct questions about ownership structure and contribution history. Nathan's attorney answered, but there was hesitation now. Small, nearly invisible, but present. My attorney answered after him, clean and complete. Then the judge asked him to state his appearance for the record in full. He did. Name first. Then relationship. I am appearing on behalf of the respondent, he said evenly. And for clarity, she doesn't have to afford me. I'm her older brother. No one gasped. Courtrooms don't work that way. But the room changed. You could feel it. Nathan's face went still. Not confused. Not angry. Still. Because in one sentence, everything he had built his confidence on collapsed. The assumption that money would corner me. The assumption that silence meant weakness. The assumption that I had no one strong enough to stand beside me. Gone. The hearing did not end there, but the balance had shifted. The judge ordered a fuller review of the property and financial contributions before any final determination would be made. No instant win for Nathan. No quick, clean outcome. No simple path. When we stepped back into the hallway afterward, the courthouse felt different. Lighter for me, sharper for him. Nathan followed us a few steps before speaking. Elena. I turned. My brother stayed beside me, not intervening, just present. Nathan looked from him back to me. You didn't tell me. Tell you what? I asked. That your lawyer was your brother. I held his gaze. You didn't ask. His jaw tightened. This changes things. Yes, I said, it does. He let out a slow breath and looked past me for a second, then back again. It didn't have to go this way. I shook my head once. No, I said, it didn't. Then I let the rest of the truth land where it belonged. But you chose this version. He didn't answer. Because there wasn't anything he could say that would put him back where he had been before the hearing began. After the hearing, nothing ended. It just slowed down. That's how things like this actually work. Not a single moment of victory, but a stretch of time where everything is examined more closely than before. Documents moved back and forth. Requests were filed. Numbers were reviewed again, this time without shortcuts. But something had already shifted. Nathan no longer believed this would be easy. And once that belief is gone, everything that depends on it starts to weaken. The house felt different after that. Not divided in the same tense way as before, just quieter. Nathan still lived there for a while, but he moved through the space differently. Less like someone arranging a future, more like someone passing through a place that was no longer fully his. He stopped talking about repainting rooms, stopped making small comments about changing things, stopped speaking as if decisions had already been made. We spoke less. But when we did, it was careful, measured, no longer dismissive. That was the real change. Not warmth, not repair, awareness. The legal process continued steadily. My brother handled most of it. He didn't dramatize anything. He didn't push harder than necessary. He just presented what was already there. Financial records, payment timelines, account histories. Details that had been ignored before were now organized and placed where they couldn't be overlooked. Nathan's attorney adapted. He became more cautious, more precise, less willing to rely on broad claims. Because now, everything had to hold up under review. And some of it didn't. There were small moments where I saw Nathan trying to recover his footing. One evening, standing in the kitchen, he said, "This is getting more complicated than it needed to be." I didn't look up immediately. "It was always complicated," I said. "You're making it harder." I turned then. "No," I said. "I'm just not making it easier for you." That was the difference, and he knew it. Months passed, slowly, then all at once. And finally the decision came. Clear, structured, final. The house was not his to take the way he had claimed. Ownership wasn't reduced to a simple narrative anymore. It was evaluated properly, based on actual contributions and documented history. The outcome reflected that balance. And in the end, I remained in the house. He didn't. The result wasn't a contradiction. It was the consequence of what had actually been proven. The day he moved out was quiet. No argument. No final scene. Just boxes, measured movements, and short exchanges that stayed practical. At one point, he paused near the doorway, looked back into the house, then at me. "I didn't think you'd," he started, then stopped. He didn't need to finish. I understood. "You didn't think I would fight," I said. He nodded once. Slow. Then he left. The house felt different after that. Not empty, not heavy, just clear. Everything inside it now belonged to a version of me that had seen exactly what happens when someone decides you don't matter and chooses not to disappear anyway. People think the turning point in a story like this is the courtroom, or the decision, or the moment someone wins. It isn't. It's earlier than that. It's the moment someone decides you won't respond. That's when they stop paying attention. Stop asking questions. Stop looking closely. And that's when they make their biggest mistake. I still live in the same house, the same walls, the same windows, the same light in the late afternoon that falls across the dining table where everything first shifted. But it feels different now. Not because anything physical changed, because I did. And that was the part Nathan never accounted for.